Welcome everyone to the week 2 start sit show. This is the Dominator. I'm Josh Larky. We're going to get right into it. This is Thursday morning. We've got a great game tonight, a little Miami Buffalo action. All right, let's talk about some starts and players that I have above consensus this week. We hit on more right than we got wrong last week. Let's make it 2 weeks in a row. I'm very above consensus on Jayden Daniels. So Fantasy Pros, consensus quarterback 7. He faces the Giants. I get it. Everyone likes Jayden Daniels. Well, let's just break down what he did last week. So some people out there are like, oh, I can't believe it. He scored 2 rushing touchdowns. That was I believe it was the first time ever that a rookie quarterback had 2 rushing touchdowns in his first NFL start. Great. Well, what I saw was 16 carries. 3 goal line carries to Brian Robinson's 1. Jayden Daniels is the goal line back. He's the primary rusher. He's the quarterback. It's Jayden Daniels. It's the show. It's Jayden Daniels. He can come down pretty far from his 28 fantasy points last week, and he can still be fine. The Giants just made Sam Darnold look like prime Aaron Rodgers. If you have Jayden Daniels on your roster, you're starting him. I'd start him over Kyler Murray. We start Jayden Daniels this week. You want a streamer? Hold your nose, Justin Fields. Consensus quarterback 16 this week on Fantasy Pros. He's at Denver. So last week, he only had 12 fantasy points against the Falcons, but the usage was great. 23 pass attempts, so he did something through the air. But then the 14 carries. We love 14 carries. He even carried 5 times within the red zone. It's pretty unlikely Fields is going to get 0 touchdowns again because the offense was semi-functional. And you might be like, well, what do you mean? He didn't have any touchdowns last week. Yeah. But the Steelers had Chris Boswell, the kicker, had 6 field goals. Now, that tells me that this offense was moving down the field. They just couldn't quite get there at the end. I think they get there at the end against the Broncos. For to be as eloquent as possible, I think they get there at the end. I think Fields is a viable streamer this week. Let's turn to some running back starts and above consensus, guys. Alvin Kamara, recommended him last week. We're doing it again. He's the first player to be on my starts or above consensus list twice for the season. He's a consensus running back 14 this week at the Cowboys. Now, last week, Alvin Kamara had 22 fantasy points. It was a blowout game script against the Panthers. They smoked them. And that blowout game script might not actually favor Kamara's skill set. So he did have 83 rushing yards and a touchdown on his 15 carries. And then he caught all 5 targets for 27 more yards through the air. He had all 3 of his team's goal line carries. So we like the rushing workload. We like that he's got the pass game involvement. What I really like is the game script for this week. Saints are 6-point underdogs on the road at the Cowboys. I think he's going to see a massive receiving workload. That's really where Kamara got there in fantasy last year. Is he was outside the top 20 in total touchdowns. He was outside the top 20 in rushing yards per game. But last year, he led the NFL among all running backs in receiving yards and receptions per game. I think he's just got this insane floor this week. The team's projected to lose to the Cowboys. We are excited about Kamara. We are also excited about Jordan Mason, the consensus running back 20 this week at the Vikings. The Niners are 5.5-point favorites. Good for the running backs. Christian McCaffrey's expected to miss this game. Obviously, if McCaffrey plays, we're not starting Mason, but I'd be surprised. All reports are that McCaffrey's going to miss it. Schefter came out and basically was like, from talking to the team, McCaffrey is a long shot. Jordan Mason, quietly, this is a fun stat, folks. Jordan Mason actually had more red zone carries, 5. Then Brock Purdy red zone pass attempts, 4 last week. Purdy didn't throw a single time at the goal line. Jordan Mason had 2 goal line carries. I think the Niners probably want to run the ball where the fantasy points are being scored, if possible, which is right near the goal line. Jordan Mason also just looked electric on Monday night. Anyone who watched that game was like, oh, man. Like, I made a live bet against Jordan Mason early in the game when I thought the Jets might come out ahead. And it sucked because I got the right reads on everyone else. Like, the rest of the slip was green. Jordan Mason took him under like 80-something total yards. And I was like, oh, one drive later, and I was like, yikes. We got everything else right. We got Mason wrong. We're not going to make that mistake this week. Jordan Mason, 28 carries, 147 rushing yards and a touchdown. Just one target in the receiving game. I'm not sure if he needs much receiving work when he's that efficient on the ground. When you look, only Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Breece Hall really have higher anytime touchdown odds than Jordan Mason for week 2 in the betting markets. That's great. I would just start Mason if you have him as a top 12 option this week. Consensus running back 20. We think he's better than that. This one, Devin Singletary, running back 28 at the Commanders. So last week he had 10 carries, but no other Giants running back had more than 2. He had 5 targets. No New York Giants running back had more than 3. He's the rare running back that leads his team by a wide margin in carries and targets. Worst case scenario for Devin Singletary was last week where they get blown out by the Vikings and he still had over 9 fantasy points. He didn't crush your fantasy rosters. I think Singletary, the entire Giants offense, has a bounce back game against the Commanders, who made Baker Mayfield look like an MVP candidate last week. The Giants, you don't have to trust me. You can trust the betting markets. They have the 18th highest implied team total in the betting markets for week 2. That reflects optimism that their offense can be respectable this week. We are starting Devin Singletary where we have him. It's gross, but we're going to go for it, folks. We're going to go for it. Turning to wide receiver, we're just going to stick with the Giants. Giants. Malik Nabers, consensus wide receiver 15 at the Commanders. I believe in it. I think the consensus is right. We are firing up Nabers with confidence this week. Again, Giants 18th most projected points this week on offense. Nabers caught 5 of his 7 targets for 66 yards in his first NFL game. He's got a high floor and ceiling this week. I think it's a bounce back. This one, we're going to dig deep now. I promise I'll stop talking about the Giants in like 30 seconds. Wandale Robinson, wide receiver 56 consensus. That's your desperation start this week. Last week, I tabbed Brian Thomas Jr. as the desperation start. He hit. Will we go 2 for 2 with Wandale Robinson? Yikes. I hope so. Wandale Robinson had a ridiculous team-leading 12 targets in week 1. Only Cooper Kupp had more targets in week 1 than Wandale Robinson, our boy, Wandale. He received all 3 red zone targets on this offense. I can't believe it. We're going for it. We've got someone in the chat saying Jamo Williams against the depleted Tampa Bay secondary. I agree. We're going to start him. The problem is the consensus already has him as a top 30 fantasy option this week. That's why we dig deep for a wide receiver 56, Wandale Robinson. I'm also confident in Chris Olave, wide receiver 20 at the Dallas Cowboys. Olave wasn't really needed last week because the Saints are just blowing out the Panthers early on. Carr only passed for 200 yards. He barely threw the ball. But they're big underdogs this week, as I mentioned with Kamara against the Cowboys. I think Olave is a fringe fantasy wide receiver 1 this week. Same game. We're going to keep bringing up this game a few more times. Don't worry. But Brandin Cooks, wide receiver 43 on the other side of this one against the Saints. Cooks had 7 targets last week. Jake Ferguson hurt his knee in week 1. There's just nothing there. It's really just Lamb and Cooks. I think Cooks is a top 30 option this week, not wide receiver 43. One last guy. I'm not even going to call him the desperation start. He's down at the wide receiver 48 by consensus. I think he's a fine start. Demarcus Robinson at the Cardinals. So he's probably starting in 2 receiver sets with Puka Nacua now on injured reserve. The Rams have the 10th highest implied team total. Overall, it's just the 2nd highest game total of the week. Just everything is signaling fantasy points are happening in Cardinals and Rams. So Demarcus Robinson had 7 targets last week. He had the highest average depth of target for any Rams player. The Cardinals have a really shaky defense. I think Robinson has a couple big plays this week in him. Tyler Johnson was the guy who had the big play last week. Tyler Johnson sucks. Tyler Johnson ran a 4.7 40 time. The announcers were like, oh, the speedy Tyler Johnson. Do you remember that on the broadcast when they were like, oh, the speedy Tyler Johnson? Dude got caught from behind instantly. I don't know what they were looking at. I don't know what they were seeing. Demarcus Robinson is much better. I think he's a fringe fantasy wide receiver 3 this week. He's not even a pure desperation dart throw. We're just going to start Demarcus Robinson this week. We've got a good question in the chat. Let's get to that right away. We've got Christian Kirk, Jayden Reed, Demarcus Robinson. Yikes. I think I'd go Kirk, Robinson, and then Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed is just a pure sit. We're sitting, I guess maybe I should clarify. We're just going to sit all the Packers receivers. I'm going to talk about Malik Willis shortly. So I'll get to that, folks. I'll get to that. Tight end, I got to start for you. We're going same game, same team. Colby Parkinson, tight end 14 at the Cardinals. They're just with no Puka Nacua, there's just this opening for targets. And Parkinson already had 5 targets last week. He caught 4 for 47 yards. Stafford's always going to put up passing yardage, especially when he faces a team like the Cardinals. Parkinson ran 80% of the routes last week. That's great for a tight end. Already mentioned that there's just a lot of projected points in this game. Cardinals have struggled against tight ends the past 4 or 5 years at this point. I'm starting Parkinson in a few leagues myself. So yeah, we're firing up Parkinson. We're going to talk about some sits below consensus players. I'm going to touch a little bit more on Malik Willis in the Packers. And then I'm going to hit you, folks, with an Underdog Pickem entry. We had 2 of 3 correct last week. We're going to try to get all 3 correct this week. I've actually got to pick 4 for you this week. Stay tuned.
DFS getting harder every year, but we're here to make it easier with the DFS Dominator, because I know a lot of optimizers keep coming out. Oh, our optimizer. What about this optimizer? But that optimizer. Well, we have a cash game optimizer that leverages the projections from Dario, Billy, the award-winning projections at PlayerProfiler.com, and builds the best lineups for cash games that have both upside and stability, because that's what you want. It's a couple clicks, boom, boom, boom. You get the best possible lineup for your cash games. But for tournaments, traditional optimizers don't work. That's why we have a Lineup Genius, which takes you through the process of building lineups the way they should be built. Which quarterbacks you want to be overweight on, then building stacks, then setting runbacks, then optimizing, and generating up to 150 lineups that you can easily import into DraftKings, into FanDuel. That's the DFS Dominator. It's only $45 a year, not a week, a year. Just go to Player Profiler, click on the DFS Dominator from the menu, and you won't be sorry.
You heard that, folks. DFS Dominator. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. I actually created the optimization algorithm for that several years ago when I was full-time at Player Profiler. I've had about half a dozen top 10 finishes in large field tournaments with over 50,000 people in it. I've made a lot of money off of this DFS process. Make sure to check it out. And make sure that we might be sitting Brock Purdy. He's the consensus quarterback 12 this week at the Vikings. Now, we've been conditioned as an American public to like Purdy in fantasy, because heading into 2024, he actually was holding the NFL record for highest percentage of passes that went for touchdowns. That's right. Basically, 1 in 14 of his NFL passes, 1 in 14 has been a touchdown in his career. Now, he had 29 pass attempts. He had 1 carry in week 1. So you're probably going to, most weeks, you get low pass volume and minimal rushing from him. This guy's a streamer type quarterback. He's not an every week fantasy starter. The touchdowns are going to come down. It's just unsustainable. You basically need 3 passing touchdowns from him to burn you by not playing him in fantasy most weeks. And I'm just sick of the Purdy nonsense. He's fine. You're getting low pass volume without much rushing. Like, I hate to say it. If I'm proven wrong, I'll eat the fat L. Like, I'd start Fields this week over Purdy. Consensus would tell you that's wrong. I'm going Justin Fields over Brock Purdy. Talk about running back. It's time to talk about Malik Willis, because I'm tempted to sit Josh Jacobs in a couple leagues. He's the consensus running back 15. They face the Colts. Now, Love's going to miss week 2 at least. So Malik Willis has started 3 NFL games in his career. He did not reach 100 passing yards in any of them. I mean, holy shit, this guy's freaking awful at quarterback. My God, you can't. I'm like, hey, Malik, 100 passing yards. And he said, nope. So he didn't even hit 45 rushing yards in any of those games either. I'm terrified for this entire Packers offense. They are 27th in implied team total this week in the betting markets. And here we go. This is the spicy take. Quote guys out there, Player Profiler, social media teams. Here we go. This is your quote for the week. I don't think Josh Jacobs and Devin Singletary are all that different in week 2. We've got two players that should get a lot of work in their backfields, except Singletary's offense is expected to be much more functional in the betting markets. There you go, folks. Ship it. That's your hot take. All right. I'm also sitting Zach Moss, the consensus running back 29 at the Chiefs. Last week, I had Moss as a sneaky start. He had 14 fantasy points despite an awful game script. I got the game script wrong. I think most of us did. We got lucky. We got bailed out. He was the goal line back as expected. We got the little luck, though. He did score the touchdown. He only had 9 carries, 44 yards. He's the guy that sold us our Pickem entry and Underdog because we had the Dak Prescott and Calvin Ridley lowers. We got those right. Come on, Moss. Now, unfortunately, this week, the Bengals are 5-point underdogs against the Chiefs. It's just not the right game environment for Zach Moss, who's an early down grinder. I'm comfortable sitting him this week. Someone in the chat says, do you think Tannehill gets the call? Maybe. This week, it's Malik Willis. That's what they're saying out of Packers camp. I would certainly hope someone like Tannehill, basically, literally anyone that's not Malik Willis, if they can start for week 3. Please, please, please save our Packers. Please. All right. You know who else I'm sitting? Zamir White, running back 32 at the Ravens. If you're starting an early down committee back on the offense that the betting markets project to score the fewest points this week, I have no words for you. Zamir White carried 13 times for 44 yards on the ground. He had 2 targets. He was outplayed by Alexander Madison, who actually kind of looked solid as a passing down back. Running back 32 for Zamir White feels like people clinging to their priors about how early they drafted Zamir White in fantasy football this year. Knock it off. Knock it off. We've got a question, Jeff Wilson or Javonte Williams. God, why are people doing this to me? I don't know. We don't know the injury report yet for the Dolphins. What is going on here, folks? The chat is just brutalizing me. It's 8:40 a.m. Dallas time. I am trying to get through a start sit show. All right, let's get to this. Let's get to this. Okay. Show is derailed for Thursday night football content. This is fucking terrible for the people. Everyone's going to be listening to this show on Friday, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, or it might be irrelevant. All right. If Devon Achane starts, oh God, shit. Oh my God. Oof. All right, I'll go Jeff Wilson. Javonte Williams was out-carried and out-route ran by Jaleel McLaughlin last week, and I think that was scary. So I just don't think, I have zero faith in the Broncos offense. Bo Nix looked terrible. Oh my God, I'm holding my nose. I'd lean Jeff Wilson for the upside over Javonte Williams. I could see sitting Jeff Wilson burning you. I could not see Javonte Williams burning you. The Bo Nix looks, I mean, oh my God, Bo Nix. He looked overmatched in every single way. Sean Payton did him no favors. If you look at his passing chart, the guy was averaging like 2 air yards per pass attempt. It was absolutely awful. In the chat, Nabers or Olave? I'd actually go Olave over Nabers, but I like them both. That's a great question, chat. Trade offer, give away Jonathan Taylor, get Isaiah Pacheco and Xavier Worthy. Oof, that's close. I'd lean yes. Let's get the Chiefs on our team. Oof, that's my sound of the car that was getting off of the road and it got back on the road. Got one more set at the running back position. Tyjae Spears, the consensus running back 35 versus the Jets. He was out carried by Tony Pollard 16-4 last week. Pollard, Spears ran the same number of routes. They both had 4 targets. I don't know how you can start Tyjae Spears in fantasy. What the hell are people doing? It's like a clinging to their priors with Zamir White. Like if you're scraping that deep, just start Chuba Hubbard or Jaleel McLaughlin instead. Both are ranked lower by Fantasy Pros consensus. I'd start both of them this week. Receiver. Now we're not sitting Justin Jefferson. He's the consensus wide receiver 6 against the Niners. But this is like week 1 when I just fucking nailed it. And I said, Kyren Williams, temper expectations. We're worried. Kyren Williams, he had 14 fantasy points, even with a score. So he barely did anything. The Niners, this is like, I'm just nervous. So the Niners defense is leaps and bounds above the Giants. They just kept the New York Giants and Aaron Rodgers in check. Rodgers actually looked kind of good in his return last week. on Monday night. I think the Sam Darnold honeymoon, I checked my schedule over there, and yeah, it ends this week. Justin Jefferson's going to see heavy defensive attention. We've got Jordan Addison banged up. There's still no TJ Hawkinson. It's such a bad scene right now. I think Sam Darnold's in trouble this week. I think Justin Jefferson, like, we're starting him if we have him. I just want you to temper expectations. We might be able to sit Davante Adams, though. Wide receiver 22 at the Ravens. Adams was out targeted by Brock Bowers 8-6 last week. So Adams didn't even lead the team in targets. He caught 5 of the 6 for 59 yards. Boring. Jacoby Myers had more receiving yards. He was targeted farther downfield than Adams. I just don't want to play the Raiders this week. I mentioned before, they're the worst projected offense for scoring by the betting markets. Adams was not in an alpha role in Gardner Minshew's first Raiders start. I don't like it. And I'm a little concerned with Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver 29 versus the Bengals. So Xavier Worthy had 20.8 PPR fantasy points last week, but just 3 targets. Sure, he caught 2 of them. He had 1 carry. That's 3 touches. He scored on 2 of his 3 touches. I think he earns more touches going forward. I'm bullish on Xavier Worthy rest of season. But still, that's our starting point. 3 targets, 1 carry. He really needs to double his role to be an every week starter. I think he's going to do that. But week 2, it's pretty early. I think we're just a little too excited about Xavier Worthy. I like him rest of season. I think the Chiefs are going to continue to ease him into NFL action. The 1 carry, 3 targets kind of feels a little bit like last year with Jameson Williams. That kind of feels like the role. So we got to be careful. Calvin Ridley, the consensus fantasy wide receiver 37 versus the Jets. Folks, we're gonna just have Ridley. I will say this: the Titans' schedule gets a lot better in a few weeks, but second week in a row, Ridley sit. 3 catches, 8 fantasy points last week. I don't think you're missing much again. The Jets just shut down Ayuk last week. Debo was basically trying to get there in fantasy from manufactured targets and carries. DeAndre Hopkins is projected to play more snaps this week as he returns from his injury. I don't trust Will Levis in this matchup. Titans team totals under 19 points. Let's just look elsewhere than Titans pass catchers. And the only player I like less than consensus in that Saints-Dallas matchup is Rashid Shaheed. Consensus wide receiver 41. He carved up the Panthers last week. They left him wide open for a big play. Still, just 5 targets, 3 catches. I think Olave is much more involved this week. Juwan Johnson might be more involved as they keep easing him back from his summer injury. There's just no need to bet on a big play. There's safer options with similar upside out there this week. One more sit for you, and then I'll get to a couple chat questions, and we'll hit you with this Underdog Pickem entry. I've got a good feeling about this one. Sit, Dalton Schultz, tight end 12 versus the Bears. Just put Parkinson in your lineup over him, that type of player. Bears defense looked great last week. So like the good news for Schultz, every down player in an elite offense. Bad news, we have Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs there, and they get almost all the targets. Brevin Jordan only ran 8 routes to Dalton Schultz 29. So Schultz was the every down player. Brevin Jordan barely plays. Yet somehow Schultz had 3 targets and Brevin Jordan had 2. That's kind of concerning. Schultz was not even allowed to do much. 3 targets, 11 air yards. You're really just like crossing your fingers and praying to the fantasy gods that he gets in the box and scores a touchdown. I just don't know if I buy that. All right, we're going to get to the chat rapid fire. Oh my goodness. All right, let's see if there's anything. We got Tua or Purdy in the chat. Tua. Herbert, Baker, Fields. Go Baker Mayfield. Highest projected game total. We're going to go Baker Mayfield there. Bucks, Lions. I like that. Ridley or Ladd McConkey. Oh my God, this is disgusting. Ladd McConkey, barely. Okay. We're scrolling through. Okay. Oh, yikes. Trade offer. Give Mason, Brian Robinson, get Zeke and Connor. Okay. No, I don't think you should do that. Okay. Shit. We've got so many questions and so little time to get to this Underdog Pickem entry. Standard scoring receiver and flex. Waddle, Devonta, Mason, Dobbins. Okay. I will go Mason, Waddle. Ship it. Would you play Rashid White over Davante Adams in the flex? Yes, I'd play Waddle and Mason over Adams. Great question. Would you start JSN or Dobbs over Pickens or Harrison? No. Pierce or Dortch in the flex. Get out of here. That's gross. Dortch. Expectations for Jordan Mason. I do. You're late to the show, Shoko. What are you doing? I just said to start him. I just said Jordan Mason 15 minutes ago. Top 12 fantasy running back. Okay. Pick 2, Nabers, Olave, Mason. I don't think you can go wrong there. Maybe we sit Olave or sit Nabers. Are we playing likely over Goddard? Hold your nose. Yeah, I think we are. All right, folks, we made it to the Underdog Pickem. Let's do this. This is the Underdog Pickem. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. I love the chat. I love the enthusiasm. Shoko's asking where my coffee is. Where is my coffee? Where is my coffee? It's right here. I'm out. You can't show up late to the show. Hit me in the chat with a question I've already answered. What is going on here? All right, Underdog Pickem. The promo code is Underworld if you want to sign up. All right, there's a freebie this week. CeeDee Lamb higher than 0.5 total yards. Check. I got 3 more for you. Jordan Mason higher than 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. Like I mentioned before, the implied odds in the betting markets basically assume he scores. He had the 4th best odds of any running back to score this week. We're just going to ride with Mason. Jordan Mason. All right, Tyjae Spears lower than 10.5 yards longest rush. He had 11 yards on 1 carry last week. And I think that's why people are like, oh, it's Spears. Folks, he had 4 carries. If you think he's breaking a long run once every 4 carries, I got some oceanfront property in Nebraska to sell you. So he had 4 carries last week. This is just 10.5 yards longest rush. It's kind of a high number against the Jets defense that should have a pretty massive advantage in the trenches against this Titans offensive line. And finally, so we hit you with Lamb, higher 0.5 total yards. Jordan Mason, higher 0.5 rushing receiving touchdowns. Tyjae Spears, lower 10.5 yards longest rush. Rashid White, higher 25.5 receiving yards. Highest game total on the slate is the Buccaneers-Lions. Buccaneers are underdogs. Rashid White caught all 6 of his targets for 75 yards last week in a game where the Buccaneers smoked the Commanders. Now, the Lions, this is a brutal matchup for running backs on the ground. We just saw Kyron Williams get stuffed over and over again. 18 carries for 50 yards from him last week. Rashid White got stuffed over and over again somehow against the Commanders last week too. I think Rashid White's going to be heavily involved again this week, but in the passing game, 25.5 receiving yards. That's easy. I think he beats that. You can 9x your entry fee if these 4 picks are correct. Promo code Underworld. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. Thank you so much, folks. I love this show. I love the Player Profiler community. I'll be seeing you next week.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.